There is a moment each night, my friend, that most who study this law have been wasting entirely. I do not say this to discourage you. I say it because the moment I describe to you tonight is not a new technique you must add to your day. It is already there. It occurs whether you use it or not. And in the great majority of those who come to me, it passes unused, night after night, while they strain and effort their way through their waking hours, trying to do with force what can only be done with rest. Now, listen carefully. If you have been practicing the law of assumption and your financial world has not yet responded, I tell you the failure is almost certainly not in your waking practice. The failure is in what happens in that 2-minute window just before you cross from wakefulness into sleep. That is the moment I am here to address tonight. Most who hear me have understood the law in their minds. They have rehearsed it. They have affirmed it. Some of them have even felt it in brief flashes of the waking day. But the waking day is the secondary field, my friend. The primary field is that drowsy threshold, that state akin to sleep, where the conscious mind has relaxed its grip on reason and the deeper mind has opened itself completely. I will tell you tonight exactly what to do in that moment. And I will tell you the precise signal that confirms whether the planting has occurred, because without that signal you cannot know. But first, let me tell you about a woman I knew. She came to me not in person but through a letter, as many did in those years. This was in the early 1960s. A woman living in a city I will not name, who had been studying the law for 2 years. 2 years. She described her practice to me in careful detail. Each morning she rose early and pictured money. She described checks arriving in her letterbox. She described a banker's confirmation letter. She pictured the numbers in an account. She had done this with great earnestness and discipline for 2 full years. And in 2 years, her financial situation had not improved by any meaningful measure. Now, I want you to listen to what she wrote to me, because the error she described is the error most people make, and I want you to recognize it in yourself tonight if it is yours. She said, "Mr. Goddard, I picture it so clearly. I see the money coming. I see it arriving. Why does it not come?" And there, my friend, was her entire problem in one sentence. She was picturing it coming. She was imagining from the vantage point of a person who did not yet have it, looking toward a future moment when she would receive it. Every morning she reinforced, with great feeling and great detail, the state of a woman waiting for wealth to arrive. And the law, being perfect in its operation, gave her exactly that state. More waiting, more arriving that has not yet arrived. I wrote back to her and I said, "You must not picture money coming to you. Do not be misled by the teachers who instruct you to visualize abundance arriving. They have not understood the law. The law is assumption. You must assume the state of the woman who already has it, not the woman who is about to receive it, not the woman who is working toward it, the woman who already lives in it, who takes it as ordinary, who feels no excitement about it because it is simply the established fact of her life." She wrote back and said she did not understand. She said, "How can I assume I have money when I clearly do not have it?" At first she resisted the instruction entirely. She wrote to me 3 more times over the span of 6 weeks, each letter a variation of the same objection. "But I don't have it. How can I pretend I do? Would that not be dishonest?" I told her finally, quite directly, imagination is not pretending. Imagination is not a costume you put on. Imagination is the reality from which your visible world is always being drawn. The woman who has money and knows she has money feels a certain way. You must feel that way, not imagine the money. Feel the state of the woman who already has it. There is a difference, my friend, and the difference is everything. Something shifted for her at that point. She stopped writing to me with objections. And approximately 3 weeks after that final letter, She wrote again to tell me that she had been contacted by an attorney managing the estate of a distant relative she had lost contact with years before. The relative had passed and had left her an amount of money she described as more than I have earned in 3 years. The means were entirely outside any path she could have constructed. She had no idea this relative had money. She had not spoken to them in a decade. The law found its own bridge of incident, as it always does, once the assumption is correctly made. But hold this thought. There is something more specific I must tell you about the timing of this assumption, because this woman, once she understood what she was assuming, had to also learn when. And I find that most who come to me with this question get the what correct and still fail, because the when defeats them. I will give you the exact when in just a few minutes, for it determines whether the assumption takes root in the deeper mind or simply dissolves the moment sleep arrives. Now, I want to tell you about my own teacher, Abdullah. Those who have heard me speak know that Abdullah was a man I met in New York in the early 1930s. A remarkable man, a black rabbi who taught me more about the nature of consciousness than any book I have since read. I was a young man at that time, and I was poor. Not poor in a romantic sense, poor in the actual sense. I had very little money and no certain path to more. I went to Abdullah one evening in a state of considerable anxiety about this. I had been using the law as I understood it then. I had been, in the waking hours of my day, imagining abundance. I had been doing what I thought the law required, and yet my purse was no fuller. Abdullah listened to me with that particular patience he had, the patience of a man who has seen 1,000 students make the same mistake and knows the student must hear it from their own lips before they can receive the correction. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Neville, you are imagining from the outside. You are standing outside the state of abundance and looking at it. You must step inside it, not visit it. Live in it." I said, "Abdullah, I do not feel I live in abundance. I feel I live in lack." He said, "Then that is what you have assumed, and it will continue to be what you experience until you assume otherwise. But here is where most fail, including you. They try to assume it in the middle of the day, when the conscious mind is wide awake and full of its arguments. The conscious mind is a skeptic. It will immediately point to your empty pockets as evidence against you. You must work at the moment when that skeptic is asleep." I asked him what moment that was. He looked at me and said, "The moment just before you sleep, Neville. That is when the door is open." I went home that evening. I lay down. I entered that drowsy state, that threshold where the day has left me and sleep has not yet arrived. And in that state, I assumed the feeling of a man who had already found his way through. Not a rich man in some far future. A man who felt, right now, in this breath, that the matter was already settled. That money was no longer a question. That abundance was simply the established fact of my life. I did not picture specific amounts. I did not imagine specific checks. I assumed a state, the state of a man who simply knows, the way you know your own name, that he is provided for. He did not say, "Do this once and never again." I persisted in it for several nights. And within days, my friend, not weeks, an opportunity presented itself for speaking work that paid me more in 1 week than I had earned in the prior month. I say this not to impress you with the speed of the result. I say it to confirm what Abdullah told me. The moment before sleep is the most fertile field there is for the planting of any assumption. Remember what I told you about the woman who pictured money arriving? This is exactly where she went wrong. She was performing the practice in the waking hours, when the conscious mind stood guard against the very assumption she was trying to make. The threshold of sleep, my friend, that is where the guard steps aside. Now I must tell you something most teachers of this subject have stripped from the teaching entirely. There is a specific signal, a particular felt quality in that threshold state that tells you the assumption has taken root. Without this signal, you will not know whether the planting has occurred. You could lie in that drowsy state for an hour and never know whether the subconscious has received the instruction. I will tell you that signal now, because most who practice at this threshold do not know what they are looking for, and without knowing, they either push too hard or give up too soon. The signal is naturalness, not excitement. Naturalness. When the assumption has truly taken root in the subconscious at that threshold moment, you will notice that it feels ordinary, the way breathing feels ordinary, the way the weight of your body on the bed feels ordinary. You will feel, in that drowsy state, that you simply are the person who has abundance, not working to become that person, not hoping to be that person, simply are, right now, already. The felt quality is of arrival, not of effort. Now, I must insist on this, my friend. Excitement is not the signal you want. Excitement is the signal that the conscious mind is still active, still adding energy to make the assumption feel real. Excitement means you are trying. When the assumption has dropped below the threshold of the conscious mind into the subconscious, it will feel as quiet and certain as the knowledge that tomorrow morning will come. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of this distinction. It is the hinge on which the whole practice turns. More people fail with the law at the threshold of sleep not because they imagine wrong, but because they measure the assumption by their emotional excitement. They feel nothing grand and assume it has not taken hold. But I tell you with certainty, and this is not opinion, it is law, the assumption at the threshold of sleep is quiet, settled, the most ordinary feeling you have ever felt. That ordinariness is the proof. Now, let me give you the exact practice for tonight. I have told you what to assume, and I have told you when. I will now give you the how. Listen carefully. First, when you lie down tonight, do not begin immediately. Allow the day to dissolve. Let the muscles of your body sink into the surface beneath you. Let your breathing slow. You are not hurrying to practice anything. You are making room for the threshold. Second, when you feel the first signs of drowsiness, that slight heaviness of the eyelids, that loosening of the day's thoughts, enter into the feeling of the man or woman who already has the abundance you desire. Do not picture amounts. Do not picture transactions. Assume the state, the calm certainty of someone for whom money is simply not a problem. Let that feeling be as ordinary as the weight of the blanket over you. Third, you will notice the feeling either settling or resisting. If it resists, do not push. The pushing is the conscious mind reasserting itself. Simply return to the feeling of the drowsy state itself. Let your attention rest there for a moment, and then gently return to the assumption. Resistance means the conscious mind is still too present. It will relax. Fourth, when the assumption feels ordinary, when the felt sense of already having is simply there, without effort, without excitement, without straining to maintain it, rest in it. Let yourself drift. Do not hold on to it. The planting is done. What you carry into sleep will be received by the subconscious as fact. That is the whole practice. First, second, third, fourth. No more than a few minutes, my friend. The great error people make is turning this into a long and effortful nightly labor. It is not. It is a quiet planting. No more effort than dropping a seed into prepared soil. There is no such thing as a stronger visualization that forces the law to work faster. Put that from your mind. The law responds to assumption, not to effort. Straining harder does not plant the seed more deeply. It lifts it back out of the soil. If you are working at the threshold of sleep for more than a few minutes with great effort, you have stepped outside the law entirely and are operating only on your own limited will. Before I close, my friend, there is one final thing I must address, and it is the piece most teachers overlook entirely. There is something that happens in the morning, in the first moment of waking consciousness, that can either preserve everything the night has planted or silently undo it before breakfast. I must tell you about that morning threshold now. Because without it, even a perfect nightly practice can be reversed before the assumption has had time to harden into fact. The moment you wake tomorrow, your conscious mind will reach, as it always does, for the familiar. It will reach for your habitual assessment of your financial life. For most people, that habitual assessment is lack, worry, calculation of how much is in the account and how much is not. And the moment you allow that habitual assumption to settle back in, you have spent the night planting and the morning uprooting. I have told you this before, but I will tell you again. The law requires consistency not because the subconscious is weak, but because the conscious mind is persistently attached to its habitual assumptions. The practice is simply to assume upon waking as you assumed before sleeping. Two words, before your eyes fully open, before any thought of your current circumstances enters, already done. The matter is already settled, already done. You will not need an elaborate practice in the morning. Simply this, the first assumption of the waking day matching the last assumption of the night. That is the arc. That is the complete practice. And now I tell you, my friend, what you have heard tonight is not a technique you are adding to your life. It is a correction. A correction of the one moment where the law has always been available to you, the moment just before sleep, which has been passing night after night without use. The poverty of assumption, that is the only poverty there is. You do not lack money. You lack the assumption of the person who already has it. And that assumption is available to you tonight, in this very hour, at the threshold of sleep. Imagining creates reality. I have said this in every lecture I have given, and I say it now once more because it applies most purely to this practice. It creates reality because imagination is the substance of all that is real. What you assume in the quiet of that drowsy state, the subconscious receives as instruction. And the subconscious, my friend, has never failed to fulfill its instructions. It knows no impossibility. It knows only what it has been told. Tonight you can give it new instructions. Not tomorrow, tonight. And you will wake already richer. Not in your account necessarily, not yet, but in your assumption. And the assumption always precedes the fact. Always. Try this now, my friend. Not tomorrow night, this very night. As you drift towards sleep in the next few minutes, let the day go. Let every argument your reason has made against your abundance go with it. You are not carrying those arguments into sleep. You are carrying only this, the quiet certainty of a person already provided for. Feel it settle, not with excitement, not with effort, with the same quiet naturalness as the breath you are already breathing, the wish fulfilled. Nothing more is required of you tonight. The world is yourself pushed out. What you assume in this hour, your world must reflect. Consciousness is the only reality, and imagining creates reality. These are not comfortable ideas, they are the law. Your law, already in operation. Sleep now in the Sabbath rest of your fulfilled desire. Let the deeper mind do its perfect work while you rest. You have planted tonight. The harvest is already in motion. Until we meet again, my friend, may you wake already rich. There is a woman I will call Margaret, though she gave me permission to tell her story. She came to my Thursday evening lecture in Los Angeles in the autumn of 1963. She had been studying the law for 2 years. She understood it intellectually. She could explain to you what I meant by the assumption, by feeling, by living in the end. And yet, her finances had not moved. Not $1 in 2 years had come to her unexpectedly. Every penny she had earned in the ordinary way, and the lack she dreaded had remained precisely as she had imagined it. She came to me after the lecture that Thursday and said, "Neville, I believe you. I have believed you for 2 years, but nothing has changed." I asked her one question. I said, "Margaret, What do you say to yourself in the last moment before sleep? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, I think about the rent. I told her, that is your answer. For 2 years you have been faithfully planting every single night exactly what you do not want. And the law, being no respecter of persons, has given you precisely what you planted. Now listen carefully. There is something that happens the night before money arrives, not the morning it arrives, not the week before, the night before. And it is not a coincidence, my friend. It is not luck. It is law. And I am going to show you tonight exactly what that thing is, so that tonight can be the night before your money arrives. Now, what Margaret did not know is that the law does not observe a hierarchy of waking and sleeping. The law operates always, but the subconscious mind, which is the medium through which the law expresses itself into form, has a specific window of receptivity. That window opens at the threshold of sleep. During the waking hours, your conscious mind is the gatekeeper. It evaluates, doubts, argues, qualifies. If I tell you during the day that you are wealthy, your conscious mind says, but look at my bank statement. It argues, it qualifies. The assumption is resisted at the gate. But in the drowsy state that comes just before sleep, the gatekeeper nods. The conscious mind releases its hold. And in that state, whatever feeling you carry into the threshold passes directly into the subconscious without argument, without resistance, without qualification. This is not theory. This is function, how the instrument works. I have told you before, but I will tell you again. Feeling is the secret, not words, not pictures. Feeling, the subconscious mind does not understand language. It understands the felt state. And the felt state carried into sleep is the seed planted in the deepest soil there is. Now, before I tell you the principle this story reveals, there is something about that night, a specific quality of the shift that took place, that most overlook entirely. I will give it to you in just a moment, for it is the difference between a story you enjoy and a law you can use. There is no such thing as a technique that works without feeling. Those who teach you to repeat words before sleep without generating the corresponding inner state have not understood the law. Words without feeling are breath in the air. They dissolve before they reach the subconscious. Do not be misled by those teachers. The feeling is the carrier. The feeling, my friend, is everything. The Bible says it with great precision. Psalm 127. He gives his beloved sleep. Now the world reads that as comfort for the weary. I tell you, it is a statement of law. The beloved is the one who has learned to enter the creative state. Sleep is not the rest. Sleep is the gift. The act of falling asleep in the assumption of the wish fulfilled is the act of creation itself. He gives his beloved sleep, meaning the one who knows the law is given the creative act nightly, automatically. Margaret had been given that act nightly too. She had simply been using it to create what she did not want. The subconscious mind does not sleep when you sleep. Your conscious mind sleeps. The subconscious works through the night without pause, without rest, without your interfering opinions. It takes what was planted at the threshold and begins its work immediately. It moves through the inner world, rearranging, adjusting, preparing the outer circumstances that will match the inner state you assumed. This is why money arrives seemingly from nowhere. It does not come from nowhere. It comes from what was planted the night before. The person who calls you the next morning with an unexpected offer, the letter that arrives, the forgotten debt repaid, the source you never anticipated, these are not coincidences. They are the work of the subconscious expressing what was assumed during sleep. Now hold this thought. Most who hear me stop here and think they have understood the teaching. But there is a specific error, one committed in the night itself, unconsciously, that cancels the assumption before it can take root. I will show you that error now. The error is this. Most people carry their financial fear into sleep as though carrying it carefully in both hands. They think about the rent, as Margaret did. They rehearse the bills. They replay conversations about money. They calculate and recalculate in the moments just before sleep, which are the most potent creative moments of the entire day. I want to tell you about my own life. I have not always known this. When I was a young man in New York, before I understood the law as I now understand it, I lay awake many nights calculating. I had come from Barbados. I had a family I loved dearly and could not afford to visit. My mother, my father, my brothers, my sisters, they were in Barbados and I had no fare to return to them. I had been in New York for years by then. I was a dancer, a young man with ambition and very little else. And night after night I would lie in my small room and think about that distance, about the fare I did not have, about the letters I received and could not fully answer, about the impossibility of crossing that ocean when I had nothing to cross it with. And that was exactly what I planted. Night after night I planted the impossibility. And the impossibility grew as all seeds grow when properly watered. I want you to understand what this cost me. It was not 1 or 2 nights of worry. It was months. Months of faithful, nightly planting of exactly the thing I did not want. And each morning I woke to the same outer world I had gone to sleep imagining. The law was working perfectly. It was working against me because I did not yet understand it. Then something shifted. A teaching came to me through my teacher Abdullah, who told me that the imagination applied in the state just before sleep was more powerful than any waking action I could take. He told me to stop thinking about the fare and to start feeling what it felt like to already be in Barbados, to smell the salt air of home, to feel the warmth of that sun on my skin, to hear my mother's voice in the next room, to feel the specific ease of having arrived, of being settled at the family table, of being home. I must insist on this point. Abdullah did not tell me to visualize Barbados. He told me to feel Barbados. The distinction is everything. Visualization is an act of the conscious mind, directed, effortful. Feeling is the state of the subconscious already receiving. You do not visualize your way into creation. You feel your way in. This is not a small distinction. It is the entire teaching. I resisted at first. I thought Abdullah was telling me to ignore reality. I said to him, "But I am in New York. I do not have the fare." He said to me, in the direct way he had, "Neville, that is your waking mind speaking. It is not your creative mind. Go home in your imagination. Sleep in Barbados, wake in New York, and watch what moves." I did this. I will not tell you I did it with complete confidence the first night, because that would not be the truth. I lay down in that small room, and for the first night I could only manage a thin, uncertain version of home. I felt the shape of the idea, but not the substance of it. The second night was better. I found the warmth of that particular island sun in my body, not just in my mind. The third night I felt my mother's voice, heard my brothers in the courtyard, felt the specific weight of the humid evening air of Bridgetown settling on my shoulders. And in that feeling, on that third night, I fell asleep. Within a week, my brother Victor wrote to me. He had not heard from me. I had not asked him for anything. He wrote that he had sent me the fare home, that he had felt a sudden urge to do so and had acted on it immediately. He did not know why he had felt the urge. He simply felt it and moved. I returned to Barbados. I had planted Barbados at the threshold of sleep, and the subconscious had moved my brother across an ocean without a word passing between us. Make no mistake, my friend, this is the law. The subconscious does not require explanation. It does not require instruction about how to accomplish what you assume. It requires only the assumption itself, felt as real, held at the threshold of sleep. It does the rest without your help. Now, I must address the most common objection I hear when I teach this. People say to me, "Neville, I have tried to feel wealth before sleep, and I cannot. The feeling of abundance feels false to me. I tell you with certainty, and this is not opinion, it is law. You do not need to feel wealthy. I am not asking you to manufacture a feeling foreign to your experience. I am asking you to find the specific natural feeling that belongs to the fulfilled desire. A man who has money does not think about money before sleep any more than a man who has air thinks about air. He simply rests. He simply has. The naturalness of it is the feeling, not the excitement, not the performance. The naturalness. When Margaret came to me the following week, she told me she had tried what I suggested. She said she could not feel wealthy. She had been in lack so long that abundance felt foreign. I told her, do not try to feel wealthy. Simply feel that all is well. 4 words. All is well. That is enough. That is a true feeling. Because at the deepest level of consciousness, all is always well. Let that truth surface at the threshold of sleep. She tried this. Not for months, not for weeks. For 3 nights. She told me later that the first night she felt she was simply speaking into darkness. She lay there saying to herself, all is well, and she did not believe it. But she held it anyway, as I had asked. She did not try to generate excitement or dramatic feeling. She simply rested in those 4 words, the way you might rest in a chair that holds your weight without your asking it to. All is well. And in that quiet, she slipped into sleep. The second night, she said, it was easier. The third night, she said, the feeling came before she had even finished settling into the drowsy state. The words arrived already carrying their own warmth. All is well. She did not know why. She simply felt it was true, and she slept. On the 4th morning, she received a telephone call from a cousin she had not heard from in 7 years. The cousin had been going through the papers of their late aunt, who had passed some 18 months earlier. In those papers, she had found a small investment account in Margaret's name that had never been located during the settling of the estate. There were funds in that account. Not a fortune, but enough to clear the specific bills that had been the content of Margaret's last waking thought every night for 2 years. Margaret received the check within the week. She had not anticipated this from any direction. She had not known about the account. She had not known this cousin was searching through those papers. No action she had taken in her waking life had caused this. No letter she had written, no conversation she had arranged. Remember what I told you at the beginning of this evening? The night before money arrives, something shifts. Now you understand what that shift is. It is not mysterious. It is the felt assumption carried into sleep. The 4 words held in the drowsy state, all is well. That money came not from the telephone call on the 4th morning. It came from the planting on the first night. Now let me give you the protocol as I would give it to someone sitting in my lecture room. When you retire tonight, do this. First, you will enter the state akin to sleep. Do not force it. Simply allow the drowsiness to come, and as it comes, ride that drowsy edge, that threshold state where the gatekeeper is nodding. Second, in that state, construct a single scene that implies the wish fulfilled. For money, this means a scene that implies financial ease, not a scene of receiving money. A conversation with a friend who says, "You seem well settled now." A sensation of looking at a statement and feeling satisfied. A feeling of peace about money without knowing why. Choose one scene and hold it. Third, do not strain to hold the scene. Do not grip it. Let it be like a breath. The assumption is the natural state. Rest in it. Fourth, allow yourself to fall asleep within the assumption. The falling asleep is the planting. When you lose consciousness while holding the assumption of the wish fulfilled, the subconscious receives it as instruction. The work is done the moment you cross the threshold. Fifth, in the morning, do not wake searching for evidence. The subconscious is working. Conscious searching interferes. Wake and live your ordinary day. Trust what was planted. Before I close, there is one final piece, my friend. It has to do not with the night itself, but with the first moments of morning. What you do in those moments either confirms what was planted or destroys it. I will tell you now, because without this, the night's work can be undone. The moment you wake, before you consult the outer world, you have a choice. If you wake and immediately think, well, nothing has changed yet, you plant doubt in the morning soil. If you wake and simply feel, for 60 seconds, that all is well, you water the seed planted the night before. This morning practice requires no ritual, only this. For the first 60 seconds of waking, do not have an opinion about your finances. Simply be, simply breathe. Let the assumption carry forward. This is what Margaret did on the morning of that fourth day. She woke, she breathed, she felt that all was well. She did not expect the call. She did not search for it. She simply carried the assumption forward. And into that open morning state, the call arrived. I will not tell you it always takes 4 days. I will not tell you it always takes 4 nights. The law is exact. The planting determines the harvest. The timing belongs to the subconscious. But I have seen it work in days. I have seen it work in hours. And I have never seen a genuinely held assumption, carried faithfully into sleep, fail to produce its corresponding outer form. Do not doubt this. The law is not sometimes true, it is always true. And now, my friend, let me tell you the thing this entire lecture has been circling. The strange thing that happens the night before money arrives is not strange at all. It is simply this: the inner state shifts first, always, without exception. The money does not cause the feeling causes the money, and that feeling, held at the threshold of sleep, moves through the subconscious during the hours you are not watching, rearranging people and circumstances and timing until by the time the sun rises, the outer world has no choice but to express what the inner world assumed. You have heard me say the world is yourself pushed out. Now you understand what that means at night. What you push outward in the last moments of consciousness tonight is what the world will reflect tomorrow. Imagination. That is all there is. The wish fulfilled. Nothing else. Tonight, when you retire, do this one thing. As you settle into the drowsy edge of sleep, release the day. Release the calculations. Release the opinions about what you have or do not have. And in that release, let one feeling enter, the naturalness of all being well. Not the drama of it, not the excitement. Simply the quiet knowing. Rest in that. Fall asleep in that. And trust what the subconscious will do with what you plant. In the morning, give it 60 seconds of the same quiet knowing before you consult the world. That is all. 60 seconds. Consciousness is the only reality. Imagining creates reality. What you assume in the night, the day must bring you. May you sleep tonight in the full rest of the assumption fulfilled. May what you plant in darkness bloom in the light of your tomorrow. Until we meet again, my friend. A man came to see me not 3 months ago. A prisoner. He had been confined for 2 years, with no hope of early release, no legal appeal pending, no influential friends to intercede for him, and yet he sat across from me and said something that startled me. He said, "Neville, I am free." Now, you might think this man was delusional. You might think he was merely trying to console himself with pleasant thoughts. But I tell you, the moment I heard those words, I knew this man would walk out of that prison, and he did. 3 months later, he walked out a free man. But here is what will shock you, my friend. It was not his positive thinking that freed him. It was not his hope or his prayers or his good behavior. Those things every prisoner possesses. No, this man understood something that most who hear me completely miss. He understood the difference between wanting to be free and being free, the difference between hoping for freedom and assuming freedom. Most of you are still wanting. This man had moved into being, and I will show you tonight exactly how he made that move. Now, my friend, you might wonder what I meant when I told this man he was already free. Let me explain to you the principle that governed his release. Prison and freedom are not first conditions of the body, they are states of consciousness. A man can walk the streets of New York and be more imprisoned than the one behind bars, and a man can sit in a cell and be freer than his guards. This prisoner understood what most never grasp. Consciousness is the only reality. I have told you before, but I will tell you again. The world is yourself pushed out. Every condition you encounter, every person you meet, every circumstance that surrounds you is reflecting back to you the state of consciousness you occupy. Change your state and your world must change. This man had moved from the state called prisoner to the state called free man, not in his imagination as most would think. In his consciousness, he had clothed himself with freedom as surely as he had once clothed himself with imprisonment. But hold this thought about states, my friend. There is a specific signal, a feeling tone that settles within you, that tells you when you have truly entered a new state versus when you are merely pretending. Without recognizing that signal, you will waste months assuming you have changed states when you have not. I will give you that exact signal in just a few minutes, for it determines whether this works for you or remains theory. Let me tell you of something that happened many years ago when I myself was learning this law. I was in Barbados, a young man with little prospects, feeling myself bound by circumstances of birth and station. I wanted desperately to come to America, but every door seemed closed to me. I had no money, no connections, no apparent way. I went to my teacher, an old black man named Abdullah, and I told him of my desire. He looked at me and said something I did not understand at the time. He said, "You are in Barbados because you want to be in Barbados." I protested. I told him he was wrong. I wanted to be in New York. He shook his head. "If you wanted to be in New York," he said, "you would be in New York." At first, I could not accept this. It seemed to contradict everything I knew about desire and fulfillment, but Abdullah was patient with me. Day after day, he explained that wanting to be somewhere and being there in consciousness were two different states entirely. "You are wanting to go to New York," he told me. "You must go to New York in your consciousness first." One evening, as we walked through the streets of Bridgetown, he stopped suddenly. "Where are we walking now?" he asked. "In Barbados," I replied. "No," he said. "We are walking down Fifth Avenue in New York. The palm trees you see are the buildings of Manhattan. The warm breeze you feel is the cool air of New York winter. You are not in Barbados wanting to go to New York. You are in New York, remembering when you once lived in Barbados." That night I went to bed as a man living in New York. I fell asleep on Fifth Avenue. I woke up on Fifth Avenue. And within 6 weeks, circumstances arranged themselves in ways I could never have planned to bring me to America. This is what the prisoner had learned. This is what you must learn. You do not live in hope of your desire. You live in the reality of your desire fulfilled. Remember what I told you a few moments ago about states. Now, this is where you see why the state, my friend, the state is everything. The evidence of your senses will tell you that your assumption is false. Your eyes will show you the prison bars. Your ears will hear the sound of doors locking. Your mind will recite every reason why your desire cannot be fulfilled. And in that moment, most people abandon their assumption and return to their former state. The world will tell you to be realistic, to accept your circumstances, to work within your limitations. I tell you they are wrong. Your present circumstances are not facts to be accepted, they are shadows to be dissolved by the light of your assumption. Do not be misled by the teachers who tell you to align with reality. They have not understood that consciousness creates reality. Make no mistake about this. Your assumption must be maintained in the face of contradictory evidence. As I have said to you before, man's chief delusion is his conviction that there are causes other than his own state of consciousness. The prison bars are not the cause of imprisonment. The state of consciousness is the cause, the bars are merely the effect. Now, here is something most teachers will not tell you, my friend. There is a moment in every day when your old state tries to reclaim you. It is the moment you first wake in the morning before you remember your new assumption. In that moment, your former self-concept rushes back like a tide. How you handle those first 30 seconds determines whether your assumption takes root or withers. I must address this critical moment next, for it is where most who study the law lose everything they have gained. The prisoner I told you of understood this completely. When doubt arose, when the cell walls seemed solid, when the guards reminded him of his sentence, he did not let these things move him from his assumption. He had put on the feeling of freedom and he wore it like a garment. I tell you, assumption, if persisted in, will harden into fact. This is not hope. This is not positive thinking, this is law. And law does not fail when properly applied. But you say to me, Neville, how can I feel free when I am bound? How can I feel wealthy when I am poor? How can I feel loved when I am alone? Listen carefully. You are asking the wrong question. The right question is this: how would I feel if I were free? How would I feel if I were wealthy? How would I feel if I were loved? Then clothe yourself with that feeling. Put it on, wear it, let it become natural to you. A woman wrote to me many years ago when I was lecturing in Los Angeles. She had been married for 15 years to a man who had grown cold and distant. For months she had been trying to save her marriage through pleading, through arguments, through tears. Nothing worked. He grew more remote each day. She came to my lecture and heard me speak of assumption. She heard me say that the world is yourself pushed out, that others reflect back to you the state you occupy. But at first she resisted this idea. She said it could not be her fault that her husband had changed. I told her what I tell you now. I am not speaking of fault, I am speaking of law. Her husband was showing her exactly what she believed about herself as a wife, about her worth as a woman, about her power to be loved. He was herself pushed out. She came to me 3 more times before she understood. She wanted me to give her a technique to change her husband. I told her there was no technique to change another, there was only the technique of changing herself. Finally, one evening, she grasped it. Instead of trying to make her husband love her, she began to assume that she was a woman worthy of devotion. Instead of feeling rejected, she put on the feeling of being cherished. Instead of seeing herself as a wife whose marriage was failing, she saw herself as a woman whose husband adored her. She told me later that the change was not gradual. Within days, her husband began treating her differently. He brought her flowers. He spoke to her with tenderness. He held her as he had in their early years together. Within 2 months, they were like newlyweds again. What had happened? She had changed her conception of herself. And because the world is yourself pushed out, her world changed to match her new conception. Now do you see that signal I mentioned earlier? When this woman truly entered the state of being loved, she felt a naturalness settle within her. No strain, no effort, no desperate hoping, just a quiet knowing. That naturalness, my friend, that is the signal. When your assumption feels natural, when you forget you are assuming because it has become your very being, then you know the state has been entered. The prisoner understood this law. He did not try to change his circumstances. He changed his conception of himself, and his circumstances changed to conform to his new conception. This is what you must do. This is what works. This is what never fails when properly applied. Now, do you see what I meant when I spoke of states? The prisoner understood this. He did not let his cell convince him he was bound. And you, my friend, must learn to do the same. You must not let your present circumstances convince you that you are what they seem to say you are. If you have been visualizing and affirming and seen no result, the failure is not in the law. The failure is in your approach. You have been trying to get something instead of being something. Let me show you the difference. But before I tell you how to apply this tonight, there is one final piece that separates those who see their world respond within weeks from those who practice for years and see nothing. It is what you do the moment you wake each morning. Most people undo their entire night's work in the first minute of consciousness. I must show you exactly how to handle that critical moment, for without this, no technique will hold. Tonight, when you go to your bed, you will do this. First, you will enter into that drowsy state akin to sleep where you are not quite awake and not quite asleep. Second, in that state, you will assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Not the thought of it, but the feeling of it. Feeling is the secret. Third, You will not strain to hold this feeling, but you will rest in it as you would rest in a comfortable chair. And fourth, you will fall asleep within that assumption. But here is what you must do when you wake. The moment consciousness returns, before you remember who you were yesterday, you must remember who you are today. You must clothe yourself immediately with your new state. Do not let the old self-concept rush back in. This is the moment of victory or defeat, my friend. Master this moment, and the law works for you. Lose this moment, and you return to your former life. Do not concern yourself with how it will come to pass. Do not plan the means. Your part is to assume the end. The means will be provided. Do not look for signs and wonders the next day. Assumption works by a law you do not need to understand, in ways you cannot predict, through means you would never think to use. Now I must insist on this, my friend. I tell you, the moment you truly assume your desire to be fulfilled, that moment it is fulfilled in consciousness, and what is fulfilled in consciousness must be fulfilled in the world of facts. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of this truth. Now let me share with you what happened in the weeks that followed my conversation with the prisoner, for this will strengthen your faith in the law. I heard nothing from him for 6 weeks. Then came a letter. He told me that his case, which had been closed for 2 years, was suddenly reopened due to new evidence. He told me that the very judge who had sentenced him was now reviewing his conviction. He told me that his lawyer, who had given up hope, was suddenly optimistic. But here is what struck me most in his letter. He said that none of these developments surprised him. He had been living as a free man for weeks. The external changes were simply catching up to his inner state. 1 month later, another letter arrived. His conviction had been overturned. The new evidence had proven his innocence. He was to be released immediately. And so you see, my friend, that assumptions do indeed harden into fact. What this man assumed in the privacy of his cell became fact in the world of Caesar. This same law that freed him will work for you. It makes no distinction between prisoner and prince, between rich and poor, between educated and simple. Consciousness, the only reality, responds to assumption. Tonight you have a choice. You can continue to assume that you are bound by your circumstances, limited by your past, restricted by your present conditions, or you can assume that you are already what you want to be, that you already have what you want to have, that your desire is already fulfilled in fact. I tell you with complete certainty, persist in your assumption, and it will harden into fact. Live from the end, not toward it. Put on the feeling of the wish fulfilled and wear it until it becomes natural to you. The law is impersonal. It works for saint and sinner alike. It worked for the prisoner. It will work for you. But you must apply it. You must live it. You must assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption regardless of what your senses tell you. And now I tell you, my friend, the secret this prisoner discovered is the secret that will transform your world. He did not hope to be free. He did not wish to be free. He did not work to become free. He simply was free. In consciousness first, then in fact. The moment he moved from wanting freedom to being free, his prison became powerless to hold him. This is the law. This is always the law. Tonight, when you retire, do this just once. Enter that drowsy state akin to sleep. Assume your wish fulfilled. Feel yourself to be what you want to be. Rest in that assumption. Fall asleep within it. That is all. You may wake tomorrow to find your world changed. Or you may find that the assumption must be worn for days or weeks until it feels natural. Both are well, my friend. Both are the law working perfectly. Do not be concerned with how or when or through what means. Your part is to assume. The law's part is to fulfill. Remember always what I have told you tonight. Consciousness is the only reality. Imagining creates reality. The world is yourself pushed out. What you assume to be true of yourself, the world must reflect back to you. May you sleep tonight clothed with your desire fulfilled. May your assumption harden into fact while you rest in the Sabbath of the wish fulfilled. May you wake tomorrow knowing that you are already what you desire to be. Until we meet again, my friend, live from the end. I was born the fourth child of 9 in a family so poor that meat on our table was a memory, not a meal. By the time I was 40, I owned property in Manhattan and lived as a wealthy man. Now, if you believe this transformation happened through hard work, through luck, through any external means whatsoever, you have missed the most important discovery any man can make. Listen carefully, my friend. The difference between the boy who went hungry in Barbados and the man who dined well in New York was not circumstance, it was not opportunity, it was not education or connections or any advantage the world recognizes. The difference was a single assumption I made about myself when every fact in my world denied it. Most who hear me speak of assumption believe they understand what I mean. They do not. They assume wealth while feeling poor and then wonder why their assumption fails to harden into fact. Tonight I will tell you exactly what I assumed, how I sustained that assumption when my senses screamed against it, and why most fail where I succeeded. The assumption I made was simple. I assumed I was a wealthy man. Not that I would become wealthy, not that I hoped to be wealthy. I assumed I was already wealthy, and I lived in that assumption until it hardened into fact. But let me tell you how this came to be, my friend, because the story will show you the law in operation. I was 28 years old, living in a single room in New York, working as a dancer on the stage. My family back in Barbados thought I had made something of myself in America. They did not know I was barely surviving. I would write home and speak of opportunities, but I slept on a narrow bed in a room so small I could touch both walls with outstretched arms. One evening, walking through Manhattan after a performance, I passed a row of fine brownstone houses. Warm light glowed from tall windows. I could see glimpses of elegant rooms, beautiful furnishings, the life of prosperity I had never known. And in that moment, something shifted in me, not hope, not longing, but a sudden knowing that this was my natural state. I belonged in such surroundings. I was meant to live this way. Most would call this fantasy. I call it recognition, for in that moment I did not desire wealth. I recognized myself as already wealthy. The feeling was not of wanting but of remembering, as though I had temporarily forgotten who I was and now I remembered. From that night forward, I began to live from that assumption. When I walked the streets of Manhattan, I walked as a wealthy man walks. When I looked at fine restaurants, I looked as one who belonged there. When I passed expensive shops, I felt the naturalness of entering them, not as a visitor, but as one for whom such places existed. Now, you must understand something here, my friend. I did not pretend to be wealthy. The world will tell you this is pretense, this is self-deception. I tell you they are wrong. Pretense is conscious deception, and it feels false to the one pretending. What I did was assume wealth as my natural state. There is a vast difference. When you assume something, it feels true to you. When you pretend something, you know it is false. But hold this thought. There is a specific feeling that tells you the assumption has taken root. And without recognizing that feeling, you will not know whether you are truly assuming or merely hoping. I will give you that feeling in just a moment, for it determines whether your assumption becomes fact or remains fantasy.
This assumption had to be maintained against tremendous evidence to the contrary. My bank account showed dollars, not hundreds or thousands. My room remained small.
My meals remained simple, but these facts became less real to me than my assumption of wealth. I lived more truly in my assumed state than in my apparent circumstances. The world, however, began to test this assumption immediately. A week after I began this inner work, I was let go from the theatrical company. My income stopped entirely. Now most people would abandon their assumption of wealth when faced with unemployment, but I tell you this apparent setback only strengthened my resolve, for I understood that the world was rearranging itself to match my new assumption. The old circumstances had to dissolve before the new could appear. I maintained my assumption through 3 months of unemployment. 3 months when logic screamed that I was deluding myself. 3 months when well-meaning friends told me to be practical, to take any job, to accept my circumstances. But I knew what they did not know. Consciousness is the only reality, and I had changed my consciousness from poor to rich. And then the externalization began. A man I had met briefly at a theater contacted me about a business opportunity. Within 6 months, I was earning more than I had ever imagined possible. Within 2 years, I was living in the kind of home I had assumed was mine. The assumption, though false when I began it, had hardened into fact exactly as the law promises. Now, I want you to understand what actually happened here. I did not create wealth out of nothing. I recognized wealth as my natural inheritance and accepted it as already mine. The creative power was not in my effort, but in my assumption. The moment I assumed I was wealthy, the universe began to rearrange circumstances to make that assumption fact. But here is where most people fail, and I must tell you this clearly. They assume wealth on Sunday and return to poverty consciousness on Monday. They feel rich during their morning meditation and feel poor when they pay their bills. This wavering between states is why their assumption never hardens into fact. Let me share with you another story that illustrates this perfectly. Many years ago, when I was lecturing in Los Angeles, a woman came to me after one of my talks. She had been applying what she called the law of assumption for over a year, she said, but her financial circumstances remained unchanged. She was a secretary earning barely enough to support herself and her elderly mother. I asked her to describe exactly what she was doing. She told me she spent 30 minutes each morning visualizing wealth, imagining herself in beautiful clothes, living in a fine home, having abundance. But then she said something that revealed her error. She said, "But of course, Mr. Goddard, I know this is just imagination. In reality, I am still poor." There was her mistake, my friend. She was using imagination as escape from reality instead of using it to create reality. She assumed wealth for 30 minutes and poverty for the remaining 23 and a half hours of each day. Her dominant assumption was poverty, not wealth. You have heard me speak of imagination, and many have misunderstood me. Let me be plain. Imagination is not fantasy. Imagination is not escape from reality. Imagination is the creative power of God in man, and what you imagine with feeling must become fact. When you call it just imagination, you rob it of its power. Now I must tell you something most teachers will not. There is a precise moment in each day when your assumption either strengthens or dissolves, and missing that moment is why most who study the law see no results. I will tell you that moment next, for it determines everything. I told her this truth: your assumption is not what you think about for 30 minutes. Your assumption is the state from which you think all day long. If you assume poverty 23 hours and wealth 1 hour, you are assuming poverty. The law responds to your dominant assumption, not your occasional imagination. At first, she resisted this. She said it was impossible to feel wealthy when her bank account proved otherwise. How could she assume wealth when she struggled to pay rent? But I persisted with her because I saw she truly desired to understand. Remember what I told you about my own experience in that small room in Manhattan? The same principle applies here. I told her to begin living from wealth consciousness immediately, not to deny her current circumstances, but to live from the feeling that wealth was her natural state. When she paid her modest rent, to pay it as a wealthy woman temporarily occupying simple quarters. When she wore her simple clothes, to wear them as a wealthy woman dressing casually. When she ate her humble meals, to eat them as a wealthy woman choosing simple foods. The shift was not in what she did, but in the consciousness from which she did it. She began to move through her days from the assumption of wealth rather than from the assumption of limitation. She came to see me again 6 weeks later. Already things were shifting. Her employer had noticed qualities in her he had never seen before. She carried herself differently. She spoke with quiet confidence. Within 3 months, she had been promoted to a position with twice her former salary. Within the year, she had married a man of means who recognized in her the consciousness of his equal. Her assumption had become her reality. You see, my friend, the secret is not in the visualization. The secret is in the assumption from which you live. Wealth consciousness is not something you put on for a few minutes each day. It is something you live from continuously until it becomes your natural state. But I must address the deepest error I see in those who try to apply this law. They assume the feeling of wealth means the feeling of having money. This is not correct. Do not be misled by teachers who tell you to visualize money, to imagine bank statements, to picture dollar bills. They have not understood the law. The feeling of wealth is the feeling of security, of confidence, of knowing you belong in the world's finest places and situations. It is not about money at all. Money is merely one expression of wealth consciousness. When I assumed I was wealthy, I did not visualize dollar bills. I assumed the feeling of security, the feeling of belonging in prosperity, the feeling of being at home in abundance. That assumption of consciousness naturally attracted its corresponding material expressions, including money. But money was the effect, not the cause. Consciousness was the cause. Now I want to give you the exact method I used because many of you will go home tonight and attempt this, and I want you to succeed. The method is simple, but it requires persistence until the new assumption becomes natural. But before I tell you how to apply this tonight, there is one detail about the moment just before sleep that determines whether any assumption takes root or evaporates. Miss this detail and you will practice the technique but never enter the state. I must address that now. Tonight, when you prepare for sleep, you will do this. First, as you lie in your bed, you will enter that drowsy state between waking and sleeping. In that state, the conscious mind releases its grip. An assumption can take root in consciousness itself. Second, you will feel yourself into the assumption of your wish fulfilled. Not visualize it, but feel yourself already being what you desire to be. If it is wealth you desire, feel the security, the confidence, the naturalness of abundance. Let this feeling become more real than the bed you lie upon. Third, you will not strain to maintain this feeling, but you will rest in it as you would rest in a comfortable chair. The feeling should be natural and effortless, like settling into your true home after a long journey. Fourth, you will fall asleep within this assumption, letting it be the last thing in consciousness as you drift into sleep. In sleep, the assumption moves from conscious thought into the deeper levels where creation occurs. And fifth, you will awaken the next morning from this assumption, not to this assumption, but from it. You will begin your day already established in the consciousness of your wish fulfilled. But here comes the test, my friend, and most fail precisely here. The world will immediately present you with evidence that contradicts your assumption. Your bank account will show the same amount. Your circumstances will appear unchanged. Your friends and family will treat you exactly as before. Now I must insist on this, my friend. This is not failure. This is the natural process. Do not let anyone, including yourself, talk you out of your assumption the moment you see contradictory evidence. The assumption must first become established in consciousness before it can express in the world. But if you waver the moment you see contradictory evidence, you return to your former state and nullify all your inner work. I maintained my assumption of wealth for months while every external fact denied it. But I knew this truth. Assumption, though false, if persisted in will, harden into fact. The key word is persisted. Most assume for a day or a week. The law requires persistence until the assumption becomes fact. Do not be misled by teachers who tell you the change will be immediate. Sometimes it is, but often it requires patience. I tell you with certainty, based on my own experience and the experience of thousands who have proven this law, if you persist in your assumption without wavering, it must externalize. This is law, not hope. The world is yourself pushed out, my friend. What you see around you is what you have assumed about yourself made visible. If you see limitation, you have assumed limitation. If you see lack, you have assumed lack. But the moment you change your assumption, you set forces in motion that must change your world to match. Make no mistake about this. You are not at the mercy of circumstances. Circumstances are at the mercy of your assumptions. The boy who was born poor in Barbados became the man who lived wealthy in Manhattan, not through any change in circumstances, but through a change in assumption. What I did, you can do. What I proved, you can prove, but only if you understand that assumption is not a technique you practice. Assumption is a state you live from. Live from wealth consciousness, and wealth must appear. Live from lack consciousness, and lack will persist. The choice, as always, is yours. And now I tell you the secret that transforms everything, my friend. When I assumed I was wealthy in that small room in New York, I did not imagine wealth. I did not visualize wealth. I became wealth. I entered the state of wealth and lived from it. The assumption was not something I did. The assumption was something I became. And from that state of being, the world had no choice but to conform. This is the difference between those who succeed and those who fail. They practice assumption. I lived assumption. Tonight, when you retire, enter the state of your wish fulfilled, not for practice, but for keeps. Feel yourself already being what you desire to be. Rest in that assumption as you would rest in your own home. That is all. You may awaken tomorrow to find your world beginning to shift, or you may need to persist in this assumption for days or weeks. Both are well, my friend. Both are part of the law's perfect operation. Never forget this truth. Consciousness is the only reality. What you assume about yourself becomes the facts of your world. The boy from Barbados became the man of Manhattan not through circumstances, but through assumption. May you live tonight in the feeling of your wish fulfilled. May your assumption take root in the fertile soil of sleep. May you awaken tomorrow from the consciousness of your desire realized. The choice is always yours to make. Choose well. Until we meet again, my friend, may you live from your assumption as though it were already fact.